Thanks for listening to the Get Over Yourself podcast, brought to you by Carol Fit Stationary Bike Program, 8-minute workouts to get super fit. Perfect Keto, the cleanest, highest potency ketone supplements. Mofo, male optimization formula with organs to boost testosterone. Let's get checked. At-home testing kits. Try lgc.com. Almost Heaven, beautiful compact home use sauna kits. B.rad's macadamia masterpiece, the mind-blowing nut butter blend. And check out bradkearns.com/shop, my personal selection of favorite products for health, fitness, and peak performance. And here we go with the show.
People who are most at risk for infection are people who are overfat. And we showed how the immune system changes when you're overfat and it can't combat infection. So we raise our risk for infectious disease. Overfat is just not an unsightly thing. We've talked about how important fat burning is, and if you're storing fat, you're not burning it. So it means that you're not burning fat, but it's worse because that overfat condition, like I mentioned earlier, is that first stage of chronic disease. We're back to the bottom line here, which is that we are responsible for our health. Even the genetic stuff that we have, our lifestyle influences a lot of our genes.
Introducing Let's Get Checked. It's a new company that makes comprehensive health, wellness, and peak performance metabolic testing more convenient than ever. You have to check these guys out right now. Go to trylgc.com/Brad. And you get a beautiful presentation of what they're all about. And what they do is at-home testing kits. That's right. They send you the kit in the mail to get the fluids they need, whether it's pricking your finger, urine, saliva. You just mail it in. Don't even have to go to the blood draw lab, and you get your report in 2 to 5 days online with all your results. And they offer all kinds of stuff for health and wellness. You get your male and female sex hormone panels, comprehensive nutrition panels, sexual health and disease screening, everything in the privacy of your own home. You know from listening that I've been a huge fan of going to the blood draw labs and tracking my numbers, especially my testosterone and my other adaptive hormones. Been doing it frequently, and that helps me really track the training and lifestyle patterns that optimize health and speed recovery, and also the stupid stuff that I do, overstress, overtraining patterns that trash my hormone levels, and then I can take corrective action. I love doing it. It's really popular, but it's a little bit of a hassle to go to the labs, make the appointment, wait around. So now you just go to trylgc.com/Brad, get a 20% discount on all their tests, and everything happens at home. It's fantastic. And check this out. The results are reviewed by their physicians. And if anything concerns you, you can schedule a phone consultation with a nurse and have 24/7 access to their staff through your treatment and your resolution. Oh, these guys are revolutionizing modern medicine and self-quantification. You're going to love it. It's so simple. The website presentation is really great. So try lgc.com/Brad, automatic 20% discount, or you can use the code BRAD if you're on their website. Otherwise, let's get checked, everybody. Hey, listeners, enjoy this show with my main man, Dr. Phil Maffetone, a long-time mentor of mine, especially back in my days as a triathlete. He's known as the godfather of fat-adapted endurance training. The MAF, heart rate maximum aerobic function, was named after him. And we have a wonderful conversation on a topic of great interest to many people, specifically 91% of the global population, which is classified as what Dr. Phil calls overfat. And this is defined, he defines it as having excess body fat that impairs health and fitness. That's right, 91% of the global population, 70% of youth are in this category, and that includes a huge percentage, I think Phil said 40% of people that have normal body weight that look fine, but have this dysfunctional fat that does not interact properly with the immune system or the metabolic system. The immune system being of particular concern when we realize the risk of COVID-19 is dramatically increased when you have dysfunctional metabolism such as obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes. So you're going to learn it all from Phil. And of course, whenever you talk to him, we get into all kinds of peripheral topics, giving you the great big picture insights, including, interestingly, talking about the role of high intensity training and how even with the hard stuff, you can get better at burning fat during high intensity workouts, preserving glycogen, not draining that glycogen tank like we've been taught is the essence of hard training for years and years. But this is the life of the fat adapted athlete and the fat adapted human. This is a great show to share with family and friends, so please get the link, spread the word, tell people to listen to this guy. He's been talking in a progressive manner with breakthrough health insights for over 40 years, and he's finally getting his due as one of the prominent leaders in the scene, looking at this overfat pandemic, listening to his advice of basically cutting junk food. You start there, you're smooth sailing. I mean, that's the big one. And then he goes into detail defining what junk food is these days. So enjoy Dr. Phil Maffetone. Dr. Phil Maffetone, so great to catch up with you.
Brad, great to be with you again. I hope everything is good and looking forward to a nice chat.
Yes, we got a little caught up offline on matters of important life quests and journeys, and I know you've been traveling around and exploring different parts of the country, and but nevertheless doing your thing. And it's so great to see the MAF method become popular. People are talking about it. I get a huge amount of questions from people, and a lot of them are relating to how to integrate these other types of training, thinking that MAF is just about going slow, and they're buying in, but I don't think they're seeing the big picture. So I think I should start with that question.
That is the big myth, and it's interesting that different kinds of people, different people who have different backgrounds, say in running, think of me one way, and then the food people think of me as the low carb guy, and then there's all these groups that think of me differently, and even in different sports, people, it used to be that people in motorsports thought of me as the motorsports doc. And so it's interesting, the bottom line is MAF is it's an open system that can incorporate anything healthy and everything healthy. And it is holistic. So it's really about doing everything healthy, not just running slow. And I do recommend people do HIIT. It's not just about low carb. It's not just about anything. It's about figuring out what works for you, personalizing your health and fitness. That's the most important aspect of it.
Well, speaking of that and the dietary patterns, this is also an area of great confusion to people, is the role of, I guess you'd say, healthy carbohydrates in the diet and the amount of personal variation that might be relevant. We can all agree that we should be ditching the sodas, the sugars, the refined grains. But beyond that, people are trying to embrace this keto movement that's been so popular, but also train for ambitious athletic goals. And we have to throw all this stuff in the mix and sort through the dogma. So maybe we can cover that part too.
Well, it's really simple. The bottom line is to avoid junk food. The problem that many people have is that they don't know what junk food is, or they refuse to accept that certain things are really classified as junk food. And the biggest culprit, and people know that sugar is bad, so they don't put sugar in their coffee anymore, or they don't eat chocolate cake after their keto meal. But they eat chocolate cake that's made with artificial sweetener. Um, and they don't understand that virtually all uh, carbohydrates that are out there today are processed. And unless you buy wheat berries and grind them yourself and make something out of it, um, many people have never consumed uh, real unprocessed wheat. And so when you go to the store and something says natural, this bread says natural, then people think that's not junk food. That's healthy. And this is the work of our good friends, the marketing folks, who have taught us that all this junk food, if it's sold in a health food store, if it says natural on it, if it says no artificial ingredients, if it even says whole wheat, it's really junk food. And so we need to get that on that level, so that, because those foods, we can get rid of the sugar and the things that obviously have sugar in it. But if we don't get rid of the foods that are processed that turn to sugar virtually right after we eat it, then we're just not going to be as healthy as we could be.
So turning to sugar is happening because of the processed nature, the acellular nature of the carb. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, it's just highly processed. So we start with a wheat berry, which is a little tiny, it's a little tiny, um, um, like a miniature pea, except it's dark brown or brownish in color, um, and when it's fresh, it's soft. But in the industry, those wheat berries are processed, so the fiber is removed. Basically, everything is removed except the starch. And not only that, but over the last 10 generations or more, the agricultural scientists have genetically changed this wheat, so it produces a lot more starch. It's a lot more carbohydrate, and it makes it easier to process it. So what we end up with is this white powder, which it may be different shades of white. It may look a little darker. They bleach the flour, and that makes it look white. And then sometimes they will add caramel coloring or some other coloring that makes it look brownish, and so it looks natural. And just like they do with sugar, they first bleach it, and it's now this white granular substance. And somebody got the idea that, hey, let's make some of it brown and call it natural sugar. Same stuff, different color, and for twice the price. And like I said, just because it's sold in a health food store, just because it's organic, just because it says natural, doesn't mean it's healthy. And so all those things really go in that category of junk food.
So then if we're left with the natural looking foods that come out of the ground, off a tree, and we're emphasizing the vegetables, fruit, tubers, and going from there, I guess we can strategize based on our individual characteristics and fitness routine, what level that intake might sustain in the diet.
Exactly. We're all individuals, and so we need to personalize that. That's what I've been teaching my whole career is I'm not going to give you a diet. I'm not going to tell you what to eat that's natural. I'll tell you what not to eat, all that junk food. But you have to figure out what works for you. And not only that, but as we age, that changes. We may be doing something different today than we did 10 years ago because our body has changed, our needs have changed, and we've hopefully have kept up with those changes. So we keep modifying our food intake, not just the quantity, but the quality. And that's very important. And I have tools that people can use, like the 2-week test and the 2-week keto test. Um, if they're over fat, for example, they know they need to reduce their carbohydrate intake significantly, and eat higher amounts of healthy fats, and make sure they maintain a moderate amount of protein. Those are, I mean, there's certain basic needs that we as humans have. Eating high quality, healthy fat, eating high quality, healthy protein. And then really the difficult part for most people is, well, how much carbohydrate do we eat? And that's why it's a good starting point, because once you've got that, everything else falls into place and it's relatively simple.
Well, I guess we just hit a fork in the road, Phil, because your research suggests that this massive percentage of the population is overfat. I believe you coined that term, and you can describe the definition there. And if that's the case, then it sounds like we have mostly an obligation to try to minimize carb intake, minimize insulin production, so we can burn more body fat.
Exactly. And just for the record, I didn't coin overfat. I defined it, overfat and underfat. Overfat, I started using when I first got into practice. I saw it in a journal article, sort of in passing. They mentioned people who had excess body fat, and they said, it's like being overfat or something like that. And I thought, boy, that's a great word, because not all overfat people are obese, which was the popular term, and not all overfat people are overweight. In fact, a recent study that I wrote up with my friend Paul Larson, called Revisiting the Overfat Pandemic, something like that. I took some of the newer research and showed that over 40% of non-obese, normal weight people were still overfat. That's a lot of overfat people that are previously classified as normal and healthy, and that's obviously not the case, because the definition of overfat is excess body fat that impairs health and fitness. And the reason that impairs health and fitness is because when we have too much body fat, it doesn't act like healthy body fat. Healthy body fat is a metabolically active tissue that helps our immune system. It helps our metabolism. It's an energy depot. It does so many good things. But as soon as we have excess body fat, those fat cells become what they call sick. They're actually called sick fat cells because they're not functioning well. They're actually doing the same as people who are malnourished and underfat. And Paul and I actually wrote a paper on COVID-19, showing that people who are most at risk for infection are people who are overfat. And we showed how the immune system changes when you're overfat, and it can't combat infections. So we raise our risk for infectious disease. So now with overfat, it increases the risk for chronic disease, so heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, etc. It increases the risk for physical disabilities, everything from athletic injuries to systemic problems like arthritis, and the pain-related problems, so pain in general. And it increases the risk for infectious diseases. And uh, no doubt about it, we will have another pandemic down the road. And what I was saying in that article is to the reader is, are you going to be ready for it?
Right. Dr. Ron Sinha wants his patients to train for the COVID-19 and think of it in those terms where you're going out there and doing workouts so that you can build resilience and not get overwhelmed by the viral load if you do happen to get exposed.
Exactly. We, in that particular um, journal paper, I said that we have survived as a species because we have this wonderful immune system. So it's not like we're walking down the road and some virus attacks us from behind the tree. It doesn't work that way. We're exposed to viruses and bacteria and microbes all the time, and we don't get sick and we don't die because we have an immune system that protects us. And that's how the human body has developed for millions of years. And today, it's pretty clear that if you're not healthy and fit, you don't have a good immune system, so you're more vulnerable, and that's exactly what the data shows and has shown for a long time. And so it all comes back to the same thing. We need to be as healthy and as fit as possible, regardless of what we're doing. If we're training for a marathon or an Ironman, or if we're training to break the speed golf record, if we're just happy to go out and work out every day and be on a trail and have, peace and joy, and want to prevent all those common diseases that people are getting beginning at an early age, earlier and earlier, in fact. It's all the same deal. It's all the same good health, optimal health, and better and better fitness that we want to strive for.
So this overfat, you called it sick fat? Is that what you said, or thick fat?
I think they call it sick adipose fat.
Uh-huh.
There's a number of names that, they come up. People like coming up with names. The sick adipose tissue, I don't think really ever caught on, but I always remembered it. It's kind of a cool little thing, but it's the fact that your fat cells, which are supposed to be healthy, vibrant, metabolically active cells, which communicate with our hormones, with our brain, with our muscles, etc., those cells suddenly don't function very well. They become they become sick, and it affects our immune system because a lot of immune cells hang out in our fat cells, and so when the fat cells go downhill, so does our immunity.
Would this characterize the visceral fat, the belly fat?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. But let me go back and just say one interesting thing is that that overfat condition with the sick adipose tissue, it not only impairs our immunity, but it impairs our resistance to the point where even artificial immunity, even vaccines, are not as active if we are overfat. So there's all this talk about coming up with a vaccine for COVID-19. That's a pipe dream. And even if they do, who are they going to give it to? Okay, in the U.S., 91% of adults are overfat and about 70% of children. So we give them the vaccine. Well, if it doesn't work, what's the sense? So, we're back to the bottom line here, which is that we are responsible for our health. Even the genetic stuff that we have, our lifestyle influences a lot of our genes. And so we control that. And the game, again, is that we need to find out what's best for us. What's the best way to eat? What's the best, natural carbohydrate level, natural fat level, natural food volume. Uh, uh, and when we do that, we get closer and closer to optimal health and fitness. And like I said at the beginning of the show, we as we age, we might find we have to tweak things more. And for me, for example, from the time I first realized all this, when I was in my early 20s, after spending my life on junk food from the moment I was born, um, I had, I ate a certain amount of natural carbohydrates. I would buy those wheat berries and cook them down and make a porridge, or I'd buy, whole rye, or whole oats, which, took 45 minutes to cook. Um, and and gradually I realized, oh, I'm eating too much of this, because my signs and symptoms started telling me that, hey, you shouldn't be sleepy after breakfast.
Mm.
That probably means you had too much carbohydrate. So I gradually reduced it, and literally over the years, I just kept gradually reducing it to less and less, and I eat very little today because it doesn't work for me. That's just the way it is. Whether I have this prevalence or this relationship with diabetes, which I was diagnosed with early in life, and I said, "Oh, wait a minute, I'm not going there. I'm not going to shoot up insulin. That doesn't make sense. I'm just going to change my diet," which I did, and it solved the problem. And whether I'm predisposed to it or not, this is what I've had to do, and this is what became really the foundation of MAF, maximum aerobic function, is how can we establish optimal health and fitness? Well, one of the things we can do is burn a lot of fat. This is what humans did from the beginning. This is how humans actually developed bigger brains and bigger bodies and longevity and protection against disease, and all of this stuff, which they never had before. And so the name of the game for me was to help people burn more body fat. And as that happens, all these problems they have start going away, and all these goals they have from a fitness standpoint, for example, start getting realized. They could run faster at the same heart rate, for example. They can basically do more with the same effort, which is what human performance is all about.
Yeah, it seems like that could be the compelling overarching goal of being healthy, is just to burn more fat, burn fat better, especially when these numbers are staggering that, almost all of us listening might be classified as overfat, even if the 40% that look just fine and seem to be performing pretty well. But again, we're comparing to, pretty disastrous normal. So we can probably all have an ambition to get better.
Yeah, that's true. And before I interrupted you, you had asked about visceral fat, abdominal fat, and there's something called abdominal overfat, which I termed. And they used to call it abdominal obesity, but these people were not obese, so you can't call it obesity. It's abdominal overfat. And it's really simple to figure out if you're overfat, and it's that you measure your waist at your umbilicus, your belly button, and you measure your height, and your waist should be less than half your height. Simple as that. And if it's not, you're overfat. And it's scientific. It's obviously easy to do, and you can throw your scale out, because the scale weight doesn't relate to fat, to body fat. It relates to weight, which is mostly water, and of course muscle mass, which is mostly water. Abdominal fat is particularly harmful because it tends to promote chronic inflammation much more than all the other body fat when there's excess amounts. And abdominal fat also reflects pericardial fat. So when we see too much abdominal fat, we know there's too much fat around the heart, which is dangerous because this fat is producing inflammatory chemicals. And the next step in heart disease after being overfat is chronic inflammation. And so having an abdomen that's bigger than it should be is dangerous, not just for the whole body, but the heart in particular and the blood vessels.
Is this standard for both males and females to strive for? Because it seems like female naturally carrying more body fat, but I guess all these are factored in with their.
They're all factored in, and through the years, and I've been measuring people from the beginning. We can't all go to have a DEXA scan every month or two. It's not practical. It's not safe. And it's not affordable. And so, how can we determine someone? This all, came out of my desire to figure out my own needs and help people figure out their needs. Okay, here are some simple tests you could do, and if you do that test and your abdominal area is less than half your height, then it rules out overfat, and if you're not, it rules in overfat. But through the years, we had waist to hip ratio, we had other measurements that have been determined to not be scientifically valid over the long term. Part of it is because it varied among different ethnicities, it varied with age and adolescence, and sometimes male, female, blah, blah, blah. Well, for the last decade or so, I think the waist to height ratio has become, I think there's a consensus that it's a very accurate. Is it perfect? No, neither is DEXA, but it's a very accurate, regular, basically no-cost item that clinicians can use and do. There's a lot of studies that use waist to height ratio, and the individual person who's the one in charge can use that every month or two to monitor their loss of body fat, to monitor and make sure they're not gaining body fat as the years go by. And it's just a very accurate and very good assessment. So it's good for anyone of any age. I say that you have to be standing to use it. So if you're a 6-month-old, it's not going to work. But, when you get to be 2 years old, any gender, ethnicity, age, it's a very effective tool.
Pretty handy. So I'm thinking of many well-meaning enthusiasts that I engage with, hear from, that are making a devoted effort to get that belly fat off, for example, and it turns out to be pretty difficult. And I want to pair together another comment you made that I guess as we age, we become more insulin resistant and possibly warranting a gradual reduction of carbs over the years, which is the same thing that happens with the accumulation of body fat.
That's exactly true. We do become more insulin resistant, and therefore we have to adapt to that problem. Insulin resistance is a serious problem. It's carbohydrate intolerance. That's what I call it, because it's a better name because it refers to carbohydrates. When you start talking about insulin, the average person starts falling asleep. So you want to refer.
No pun intended there.
They can relate to carbohydrates. They may not quite know the full extent of what carbohydrates are and which ones are healthy and not, but it gets them in the ballpark. So yeah, as we age, we have to reduce our carbohydrates. Otherwise, we develop increased fat on our abdomen, and that's a big problem. And it's interesting that the two things that people complain about with when they're following MAP, one is that abdominal fat. They just can't get those last couple of inches, or there's those last few inches, or any of the abdominal fat. Everything else is gone, but they've got this abdominal fat lingering on and they don't understand. And as it's also related to the abdominal fat, they can't get faster at their MAF heart rate. They don't understand it. They're very strict, and they promise that they're being honest with the 180 formula, and Maffetone doesn't know what he's talking about. This doesn't work for me. Well, it works for everybody. The problem is that when you don't get faster at your MAF heart rate, and you're kind of stuck in this slow motion mode, and or if you've got excess body fat, it's really the same problem. And it's that people aren't addressing that carbohydrate intake issue. They're either eating junk food that they think is natural, or there's hidden carbohydrates in what they're eating, especially in people who work, they commute to work, they may be traveling a lot, and they have to eat out often. I can tell you, especially coming from the restaurant industry, I can tell you that sugar in a restaurant is one of the most common spices. They put sugar in everything. And flour. You go in, you say, look, I want some sliced eggplant sauteed in butter. They say, oh yeah, we could do that. I said that, but there's no wheat on it. You don't put flour on it. Oh no. And then with some tomato sauce, you don't put sugar in the tomato sauce. Oh no. And you ask them and you question them how it's made, and you find out, yeah, well they just dust the food with flour, and you have to put a little sugar in the tomato sauce because that's what my grandmother did. It tastes better. Yeah, we are a junk food society, and our tastes are for sweetness. And if there is no sweetness in a tomato, we don't like it. And so just read the ingredient lists on those tomato sauces in the grocery store, for example, or anything. Any packaged food that you think is okay. You buy it from the health food store. It says natural, and you read, try and buy bacon, natural bacon, organic bacon that doesn't have sugar. It's not easy. It's that everyone uses sugar because that's what people expect, their tastes at least. And if you don't have sugar in it, people are not going to like it, and it's not going to be a successful product.
Yeah, I was talking to Todd White of Dry Farm Wines, or he sells these sugar-free, chemical-free wines, and he was explaining that mainstream wine production uses these harsh chemicals to arrest the natural fermentation process that would ferment all the sugar out of the drink, but they want to keep it in there because people's palates are expecting it, and the wine ratings and the bold taste and the score on the 0 to 100 scale is all predicated that we have to throw some sugar back in there through harsh means, where the product, if you just let it do its thing, would be sugar-free.
Yeah, and what happens with sugar addiction, which is what we're talking about, is that it changes our taste buds. It's not permanent, but it changes our taste buds. And we now, with sweet taste buds flying high all the time, we now cannot eat things like vegetables. Vegetables are too bitter. So it's not just that kids aren't eating their vegetables, adults aren't either, because these vegetables are too bitter. And in restaurants, this is another place where they throw some sugar because now they make the vegetables sweeter. But because our taste buds have changed, we as a society can't handle bitter things. Coffee's bitter, so we've got to put sugar in it, and tea and vegetables and so on and so forth. And what happens when we get off the sugar and when we overcome the addiction, which can take time. I mean, we can get off the sugar overnight, but that addiction to sugar and those sweet taste buds, they linger on. It takes a while before you could walk past a bakery and not keep looking and breathing in deeply because you think of all that wonderful stuff that you think is wonderful. But eventually that disappears. But what also happens is we lose that taste bud effect. That sweet taste goes away, and then and only then can we drink a great espresso and taste the real flavors that are there. Only then can we consume a dry red wine and taste the bouquet that is just amazing. And only then can we eat a piece of raw cacao. That's the chocolate before they put the sugar in it, which is very bitter, but it's so delicious. And it's sometimes a test when people say, "Oh yeah, I don't eat sweets anymore. I don't have a desire to eat sweets." I'll give them a little piece of raw cacao, and half the time they spit it out because they can't handle it. I said, "Well, you've got a ways to go still."
That's the final test.
Yes.
Order up 100% cacao bar and see how you do. Yeah, I'm working on it, Phil. I'm like in the 85 range is my favorite, and it certainly is a big difference, but it's interesting to convey it that way. And I also might observe that another contributing factor to this sugar addiction, besides the secret ingredients from the restaurant, is this fitness regimen that's slightly too stressful, which has been your life's work for many decades, telling people to slow down. But I don't think people are making the connection properly that these high carbohydrate burning workouts, a pattern of them, is going to push you back in the direction of reaching for the foods that are contributing to that visceral fat.
Exactly. There's in improving our ability to burn fat, maximum aerobic function, burn as much fat as we can. There's a food factor, which is what we've been talking about, and there's an exercise factor, which is where the intensity becomes very important, because as our intensity gets too high above that sub-max level, we shift away from fat burning towards sugar burning. Although if our diet's no good, we're not burning much fat anyway, no matter how slow we work out.
Oh.
And then there's the stress factor. There's the, apart from food and exercise, there are other physical, biochemical, and then all those mental, emotional stressors that affect us. And if we don't adapt to stress well, these stressors affect our metabolism in part by shifting our ability to burn fat toward burning too much sugar. So we become less of a fat burner as stress goes up. That's the effect of cortisol in particular. And so that's a very important factor as well.
So this is a big insight, because we're not talking about being in the kitchen or the gym right now. But if we're running hot, if we're hot wired and running around on fumes and highly stressed and producing a lot of cortisol, what's happening downstream to make this fat promoting or and so forth?
In short, we're storing more fat because we're not burning it. We don't, we're hardwired to store fat because that's how humans have developed metabolically. We store fat so that when we are ready to burn it, there's plenty there to burn. With all that stress, we just keep storing more fat. And just go to any marathon or triathlon, and you'll see the majority of athletes are over fat. Maybe not the pros, although there are exceptions there as well. But certainly in the amateur rank, the age groupers are the numbers of over fat are extremely high, not as high as the general population, of course, but still too high. And so by inducing that stress and having that cortisol effect, we are storing more fat, burning less, which also coincidentally makes us crave sugar. So we maintain our sugar addiction, and we rationalize that, oh, I just did this hard workout, or I just did this long workout, and I need carbs to replace my glycogen stores. Well, why did you burn up those glycogen stores to begin with? The answer is you didn't burn enough fat. That's one of the things that fat does, not only with competition, not only with a HIIT workout, but with training from day to day, is we burn a lot of fat and we conserve our glycogen.
Wow. I mean, this is now we're departing from the dogma of decades that you want to go burn off that glycogen during a workout and then replenish really quickly so you can restock the glycogen stores for the next workout. But now this new paradigm is becoming apparent where I don't know if you saw that guy in Utah that ran 100 miles without consuming any calories, and these outliers are showing what's possible. But I think for all of us to rethink this idea that the spinning class at the gym with the music and the high intensity is paired directly with heading over to Jamba Juice to get a fruit smoothie afterward.
Which has a lot of sugar in it. No question about it. But the problem is that it's not a new concept. It's not. It's an old concept. This is how humans were for millions of years, and suddenly, depending on how you want to relate to it, is it the agricultural revolution when we started processing carbohydrates? Is it the 1950s and 60s when the sugar companies started banging it into our heads that sugar was important because humans are glucose-based animals, and then the running boom hit and all the sugar stuff grabbed onto that, and Coke and Pepsi spending billions of dollars to convince us that it's the real thing and it's natural, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a blip in human history that has created a situation where over 90% of the people in the entire world are over fat. And it's a serious thing because over fat is just not an unsightly thing. We've talked about how important fat burning is, and if you're storing fat, you're not burning it. So it means that you're not burning fat, but it's worse because that overfat condition, like I mentioned earlier, is that first stage of chronic disease because it produces inflammation, which is the next stage of chronic disease, and it worsens insulin resistance and carbohydrate intolerance. And it promotes all those risk factors that we hear about, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, pre-diabetes, pre-hypertension, and next thing you know, there's now a diagnosis of diabetes. There's a diagnosis of hypertension, a cancer diagnosis, heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's. Most of the chronic diseases are these downstream effects from overfat. And most of those chronic diseases are preventable, and you prevent it by reducing body fat. There's no question about any of this. And when we start looking at the big picture, we realize that the trillions of dollars, tens of trillions of dollars spent every year, for the most part, go to these preventable conditions that we can do away with almost overnight. I mean, we can do away with the process very quickly. But when we look at populations of patients, for example, in clinics who do this kind of stuff, which I had, we can see that in the course of a year, you can completely change a person's health and fitness. And if they're on 10 medications, now they're not on any medications. They were overfat, now they're normal fat. Now they're physically active when they were couch potatoes. And so the money they're spending on healthcare, is dramatically less. And this is a political buzzword. We're going to fix healthcare. We're not going to fix healthcare. We're going to spend more money. That's the problem. Unhealthy people is a lucrative business. Just look at the Wall Street stocks. Those stocks are booming. They've been booming.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of well-meaning, well-intentioned people, including the candidates who want to reform healthcare and all that. But it does seem like that we're attacking the problem from the wrong direction, and
we're treating symptoms.
Right.
That's exactly what's happening, and we're never looking at the cause, because there's too many lobbyists that don't want the cause to be developed. Sure, we've got some. We don't have sugar in schools. We think that's not true. We're trying to take sugar out of hospitals, but companies have long-term contracts like Coke and Pepsi, so that's not easy to do. We're trying to, reduce unhealthy foods, and we're going to cut down on the size of the containers for soda. Well, that's just gimmicky hogwash. So we cut our soda in half, and the kid now has two of them instead of one big one. Even if it was kept at half, there's a threshold of sugar and that insulin mechanism. It doesn't take much to create the overfat condition. And if we cut our refined carbohydrates in half, or if we cut them by 2/3, in many people, it may not make a difference, because we're not at that threshold yet where it affects our metabolism. Sometimes it does. It depends on the person, and then that's sort of what people go through when they go through this process of personalizing the foods they eat. They find a level of natural carbohydrate intake, for example, that makes them feel really good. And then the fat and the carbohydrates, or the fat and the proteins, kind of fall into place easier. But that's an interesting thing to see people go through, and how much variety from person to person there is. And then over the years, how much people change as the years go by.
So I guess that kind of describes what your 2-week test is doing. And for listeners not familiar with it, maybe you can describe what it's all about, and then where you head from getting the results after 2 weeks.
Yeah, the 2-week test I developed early in my career as a way to confirm this problem called carbohydrate intolerance. Back then, you couldn't do a blood test. You had to go into the hospital to do a special test, and that, of course, was not a practical thing. So I had a list of survey questions about how people felt after their meals, how people felt if their meals were delayed, do they get sleepy after meals, do they, and then I realized that I could give them a diagnosis that they're carbohydrate intolerant and tell them to cut down on carbohydrates. But I wanted them to be part of the process. I wanted them to experience what it was like to be at a level of carbohydrate intake that was compatible with a healthy metabolism. And so I developed a 2-week test where you eliminate junk food and then you cut your other carbohydrates way down. So you're eating plenty of food, but you're plenty of vegetables, but no fruits, no grains, even the natural ones, for a period of 2 weeks. And you monitor your signs and symptoms. And at the end of 2 weeks, you look back at your signs and symptoms and say, oh, gee, I'm not sleepy after meals. My energy's better. I'm sleeping better. I'm waking up feeling good, not depressed, whatever. And now you say, okay, what do I do now? Well, what you do now is, if you want, you start adding some natural carbohydrates every other meal. So maybe you have a small piece of fruit for lunch after you've had your normal low-carb breakfast. And if that piece of fruit makes you sleepy after the meal, then you know that little piece of fruit is too much carbohydrate for you. And people go through this, and what it does is it just brings out their instincts and their intuitions. You know, animals know how to eat in the wild, but humans have forgotten that. So it brings people back to that. And so you should be able to be sitting, having dinner, and get to that next forkful, and before you put it in your mouth, you say, oh, I'm finished. I feel finished, and you can put it down and you're done. That's the end of your meal. People can't do that now. Animals do that. They don't, I'm not talking about pets who are eating junk food every day, but animals in the wild will not just keep eating until they explode.
Well, we're distracted because we're watching TV while we're having too many bites of popcorn or whatever it is.
Yes.
So I've had people come back with massive weight loss in the 2 weeks where they did the carbohydrate restriction test. And you said earlier in the show, like, a lot of the weight of the body is water, the muscles are full of water, the glycogen stores. So what kind of fluctuation do we experience from day to day? And then when people are coming back and saying, I lost 10 pounds, that doesn't really represent 10 pounds of body fat, because that's impossible in a short time. But what are these numbers revealing in terms of what's changing in the physiology?
Yeah, it does represent, in the 2-week period, it does represent a lot of water, but it also represents some fat loss, as one study showed that I've referenced from years ago, actually. But it's not the purpose of the 2-week test to see a weight loss. The purpose is for you to figure out how much carbohydrate you should be eating, and then and the fat loss kind of is a little bit of a delayed effect. But as the weeks go by after that, you see the waist get smaller and smaller, and that is fat related. And all the signs and symptoms, the abnormal signs and symptoms, like sleepiness after meals, or being, feelings of depression, hunger, very common carbohydrate intolerance symptom. That, all that disappears as we start burning more fat. And not only that, but we start burning more fat when we exercise, not just when we exercise slow, but even when we're doing a HIIT workout, we could burn more fat. And especially when we're competing, we can burn more fat during competition. And I can pretty much guarantee you that in competition, in an endurance event, those who finish up front are burning a lot more fat relative to their glucose than everyone behind them. So there's a very important performance factor there. Plus, it's human performance, like I mentioned earlier. It's all about human performance, and a lot of that has to do with brain function. And so with the 2-week test, one of the things that people routinely say is that my brain is working better. It's not just that I'm feeling less depressed. My creativity is better. I'm able to think better, work better. I can rationalize things. I can have conversations better. My memory's improved, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an amazing thing, and it's part of the process of personalization.
I guess the brain is getting a more steady source of fuel because you're not so dependent on glucose in the muscle tissue, and perhaps you're making ketones.
Exactly. Your body, when you're not burning much fat, your body grabs a lot of that glucose, and there's sometimes less for the brain. And when you start burning more fat, you end up having a lot more ketones around, which the brain can also use instead of, along with glucose. And likewise for the muscles, you're using a lot, and not just our skeletal muscles, but the heart uses ketones, a lot of ketones, in other tissues. And so this has become not just a way to feel better and perform better, but as a therapy for diseases. Ketogenic eating is an old remedy for seizure disorders. The research, the research is really moving along well, and you're seeing cancer therapies, you're seeing diabetics responding to being in ketosis, being able to get off medication. What's interesting in hypertension is that if we plot out the amount of insulin someone has over the years, and we plot out their increasing blood pressure numbers, they parallel each other. Insulin goes up, so does blood pressure. Well, if we get insulin coming down, the blood pressure comes down. Interesting. And one of the things I recommend that people do if their blood pressure is high, when they do the 2-week test, to keep monitoring the blood pressure. Because if they're on medication for hypertension and they do the 2-week test and now the blood pressure comes down to normal, which it often does, now they're on medication and their blood pressure is normal, which means they are hypotensive, and that can be dangerous. So I tell them to work with their doctor or find someone who can accurately monitor their blood pressure, because that could happen. And as a result, their doctor needs to adjust the medication or get rid of it. Likewise, in women who are of childbearing age. And I learned this by mistake in the beginning. I realized that the 2-week test was making women more fertile. And I noticed it first in a woman who was 40 years old or 39. And, one of the things she complained about is that, her and her husband had tried to conceive and they were unable to. And so they've given up and blah, blah. So she does a 2-week test. She's lost a bunch of weight. Her back is better, which is one of her main complaints. And suddenly she's pregnant. And I didn't think too much of it, but suddenly it happened to somebody else. And it was interesting that these people started sending me patients who were infertile. And it became
Dr. Phil's fertility clinic. Come on out.
My go-to fertility treatment. It was a little funny, but I mean, they were happy. So the reduction of carbohydrates and the reduction of insulin triggers a significant balance of all the hormones. It's not just the sex hormones. It's not just insulin. It's all the hormones, including testosterone. So it's amazing what's amazing is how much damage eating too much carbohydrate can do. And in particular, it's amazing how much damage eating a small amount of junk food can cause.
I guess that's kind of the big takeaway here is we traffic so much in rationalization, celebratory mindset, and also the unhealthy baseline, so that if we're a few steps ahead of normal, we think that's great, rather than seeing the whole thing as a big fat disaster. And so, the idea of getting a zero tolerance policy going might not be pleasant for a lot of people, but it seems like that could be the thing that could push people into a new realm of functioning, like the fertility stories that you tell.
Yeah, and with the increasing aging population, people are concerned about what they have seen in their parents. They've seen significant cognitive dysfunction, not just Alzheimer's, but the memory loss, strokes, and the ongoing care that's needed. Basically, they have seen their parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles go through this decline. And because modern medicine is so good, they can keep people alive, but with low quality of life. And people start losing their independence. And the thing that people are afraid of are being like that. In particular, they're afraid of losing their memories. They're afraid of losing their driver's license and things like that. I'm happy if somebody can take my license away and drive me wherever I need to go.
Oh, I'd take that bet right now. If someone could drive me anywhere the rest of my life, or a self-driving car, I would turn in my paperwork right now and just sit in the back seat.
Yeah. I wrote an article called Healthy Driving, and a lot of it was basically, we've got to have a good brain, and if we're eating carbohydrates, we're not going to have a good brain. So there's a lot more accidents from people whose brain function becomes impaired because they're pre-diabetic, or they've just eaten a donut. It doesn't compare to the number of alcohol-related accidents, and so we need to look at these things. We need to look at the fact that we talk about prevention, but we never implement it. It's almost a political term these days, and it's really sad. And people have seen that, and people with aging are looking for something to do that is going to change it. And I'm hoping, and I've been hoping from the beginning, and I'm hoping that the increasing trend of reducing sugar, low carbohydrate, increasing body fat, increasing healthy dietary fats. I'm hoping that trend, which has come and gone ever since I can remember, only to be fizzled out by the sugar industry, for example. I'm hoping this trend that seems to be catching on now is here for good. And we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Well, thanks to your hard work, we're making progress, and it is heartwarming to see that. I still feel like most of the responsibility is on us to get our middle finger working and stick it to the people that are still putting up billboards, convincing us to, drink the vitamin water after the workout. There I go. I just lost another sponsor. But before we let you go, Phil, I want to cover that interesting insight when you talked about high intensity exercise, still in the context of improving your fat burning, and how you can burn more fat calories even through the process of a workout that clearly is causing some demand to be burning glucose. But I think it's all about doing it correctly and also coming to the table with those fat burning capabilities thanks to your diet, and of course thanks to the aerobic base building that you've been talking about for 40 years.
Yeah, and I learned in college that we burn fats for energy, we burn sugar for energy, and there wasn't the kind of research that we had that would come up as the years went by. But I knew it, and I learned how to practically, implement a lifestyle to improve it. And when I started testing athletes on a treadmill and measuring oxygen and carbon dioxide, which tells you how much fat and how much sugar you're burning, it basically proved that what I was talking about made sense. And in fact, it was only a few years ago, and this is how I met Paul Larson, Professor Paul Larson, who is often I call him my professor. He had, him and his team had published a study that showed that HIIT athletes, or young college students who were doing high intensity training, could burn high amounts of fat. And I sent him an email. When you publish something, you authors are always hoping somebody sends them a letter, and nobody usually does. But I sent Paul a letter, and he said, "Hey, I've been on your program for a long time," and I was happy to hear that. And I sent him Mike Pig's test. I said, "Look, here's a guy I did, and look at how much fat he's burning when his heart rate is like 170 something." And it was basically what his study had shown. And so we've been friends and colleagues ever since. But the evolution of that fat burning for me from being a college student has been interesting in looking back. In the beginning, it was really, really tough. People would call me names. I had people storm out of lectures because of the things I would say. I mean, it was kind of funny, actually. In fact, the first time I read about this young doctor who mentioned fat burning was a guy named Timothy Noakes. I was new in practice. He was new in practice. It was actually a study he did called heart disease in marathon runners. And
imagine that.
Imagine that. And they wouldn't let him present the paper at a conference. And so he called this person, that person. Finally, they said, "Okay, you could present it," but they gave him a slot during the coffee break.
Oh, mercy.
So, things have changed, and I'm Tim is one of my heroes. Things are changing, but we're still left with a population that's overfat, and we're seeing increasing rates of chronic preventable diseases. And when are we going to stop this? Why can't people understand that sugar is the new tobacco? And part of it's addiction, and part of it's all the ads, like you mentioned. And watching TV doesn't help, because that's how they keep people addicted. But the bottom line is that it's all up to us as individuals. And the bottom line is it's all in your hands, listeners, and me and you, Brad. It's all in our hands. And we are responsible for our health in more ways than we are not. So that's a good conclusion.
I love it, Phil. Listen to you summarizing the whole thing. Listeners, we have life-changing advice from the main man who's been doing this for decades now. You had such great success with the elite athletes, and that's when I was first drawn to you. There's nothing like getting your ass kicked by someone who's burning more fat to have you turn on to a new idea and a new training philosophy and new diet. So I love what you're doing over there at philmaffetone.com. That's where we're going to invite people to learn more about you and look at your great products that you're putting out, and anything else you want to promote, or where should we connect?
Well, philmaffetone.com is the website, which has all those articles on health and fitness. There's probably over 200 of them there. And of course, all my books are out there, but the articles are free. And that's the place to go for the kind of information we've been talking about.
Phil Maffetone, we got to wrap. Thank you for spending time with us, and good luck. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Brad. You too.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. Thank you for listening to the show. We would love your feedback at getoveryourselfpodcast@gmail.com. And we would also love if you could leave a rating and a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. I know it's a hassle. You have to go to desktop iTunes, click on the tab that says ratings and reviews, and then click to rate the show anywhere from 5 to 5 stars. And it really helps spread the word so more people can find the show and get over themselves, because they need to. Thanks for doing it.